Contemporary craft fosters the use of traditional craft materials such as ceramic, fiber, glass, metal, and wood to make art. Our community honors the history and heritage of craft while showcasing modern exploratory work. On this season of Sounds from the Studio, host Sydney Leslie will be taking a look at contemporary craft's 50-year history through interviews with the directors, curators, and artists who helped us grow into the organization we are today. Welcome to Season 3 of Sounds from the Studio, Archive This. Find SCCPGH on Instagram and Facebook, and visit our website, contemporarycraft.org. Sounds from the Studio is available on all podcast platforms. We just ask that you please follow, rate, and review the podcast so more folks can find it.
In contemporary craft news, our new exhibition, Gay, The Beauty of Ephemeral and Eternal, opens on Friday, September 13th, and is on view through January 18th. This exhibition invites viewers to explore the captivating duality between the beauty of ikebana, traditional Japanese flower arrangement, and the eternal nature of well-crafted objects. 4 artists engage with members of Sugetsu Ikebana Pittsburgh, sparking contemplation of time, materiality, and heritage. This dialogue illuminates profound connections in Japanese culture that are woven throughout these art forms, harmonizing impermanence and eternity in Japan's cultural tapestry, bridging past, present, and future. I hope you'll join us for the opening reception on Friday, September 13th from 5:30 to 8 p.m. Also, a shameless plug for myself, that same night, our first Archive This exhibition opens in the Jerry K cases, so also be sure to check out some selections from our permanent collection at the opening. Welcome to Sounds from the Studio. Today I'm excited to talk with Kate Lydon, our former Director of Exhibitions at Contemporary Craft. Welcome, Kate.
Hi, Sydney. Nice to see you today.
Good to see you. I'm so excited to talk to you today. You were at Contemporary Craft for 35 years. And if I did the math right, I was wondering how many exhibitions you would have worked on over that period of time. So if I did the math right, I know you weren't always in the role of exhibitions director, but over 35 years, you would have worked about 278 exhibitions. Did you know that?
I think it was a rather large number, but each one of them was great and special to me, and I really loved it. It was great.
Yeah, I was just flabbergasted by that. But I'll let you introduce yourself a little further. Would you mind telling us a little about yourself, your background, and how you came to contemporary craft?
Sure. Thank you. I just wanted to start out by saying really quickly, thank you for having me today. And
Sure.
I love everything Contemporary Craft does, so this will be really fun today. Really briefly, I graduated from Denison University in Ohio with dual degrees in art history and French, and then I received a master's degree from the Archival Museum and Editing program at Duquesne. And my first job in the arts really started as an internship in 1982 at the Pittsburgh Center for the Arts. And subsequently, I was hired there as exhibitions coordinator, and that was sort of a little bit where I started working on exhibition installations, and I have to say, a really amazing exposure to some artists that were very of the time: Keith Haring, Robert Arneson, Viola Fry. Again, an early beginning for craft there for me.
Yeah.
And so after that, I went on to work at the Frick Art Museum as the registrar there. And I was there for about, I think about 2 years, and got a really great background in doing registration, worked on a couple of really interesting shows, the landscapes of Edward Lear, mostly drawing exhibitions, 17th and 18th century drawings. And then in 1987, I was hired by Linda Metropolis and came to work at Contemporary Craft. And really, to this day, I can remember that first day I walked in there and just being blown away by the work that was there, and a very different experience, certainly from the Frick Art Museum. So it was a great start for me.
Yeah. Did you start at Contemporary Craft as a registrar? I know I've seen your
Yes.
name with that role within the archive.
Yes, I started as the registrar. Linda was looking at that time for someone to do registration and installation work. And
Okay.
so that's really how I got my start there. And then really under Linda Metropolis, she was our first executive director at our Strip District location. And while I did do exhibitions work there, she was the primary leader in organizing the exhibitions at that point.
Okay. Yeah, as you said, you're a registrar, and this season we're talking about the history and archive and permanent collection. And from what I know, you're actually the person who created kind of the first iteration of the exhibition archive and cataloged the entire permanent collection.
Well,
What did that look like throughout the years for
sure,
you?
sure. Well,
Yeah.
I think you have been doing such a wonderful job with the archive, and I know you've been bringing a lot of information forward for your audience. And you may have talked previously about how Contemporary Crafts founder Betty Raphael organized an exhibition in 1979 at the Carnegie Museum of Art. And that exhibition ultimately traveled around the state of Pennsylvania. I think it went to 11 small cities throughout the state and included the State Museum in Harrisburg as part of Governor Thornburg's inauguration. But what happened was that exhibition came back to Pittsburgh, and that was the basis for very many of the works in the collection. And at that time, Sue Donnelly was an employee with the organization in Verona. And she was actually the one who made all those beautiful boxes of accession cards that I know you still have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe for the audience, you want to even just give a share of what's on some of those cards that, an accession card to someone, they may not even know what's included on that. I don't know.
Yeah, they're all basically typewritten cards and then handwritten out all the details of whether it be dimensions or medium and how we got it or if it was donated and how much it was.
Right,
And we have over 300 objects in our collection,
right,
and we have 3 boxes of those cards based on accession number, artist name, and medium.
right.
So there's a lot of work put into those
Oh,
cards, and there are photos attached.
right, right.
And I still use them very regularly, I
Yeah.
will say. Yeah.
It's a really important document, and I know while we have other files on those artists, more formal
Mm,
files, those are very key to all the work that you're doing, certainly.
absolutely.
Um, when I came on in the later 80s,
Hmm.
what we didn't have at that time was a collections policy. And so
Yeah.
I worked closely with Linda Metropolis and other museum professionals in the community to create that policy, which sort of directs how we would take on objects, how we would document them, how we could de-accession, and what the parameters were. So that was something that I did clearly work on during my time. And then when we were in the Strip District before our first sort of renovation there, we had a designated area of cases where the collection rotated. And so
Okay.
people did see, pieces on a, you know, outside of the, storage area.
I know right now, I would say we haven't been actively collecting or acquiring for a number of years, probably over a decade at this point. But when we were being more intentional about acquiring new works, what did that look like?
Well, in some ways, the beauty of our collection is that to your point, probably 250 of the objects were from that capsule time period of that traveling exhibit. And as you know, so many of them are beautiful dated objects that are representative of the 70s. And it is really, really fun to look through all those pieces. Again, in a range of media, just like everything we do, clay, glass, metal, wood, fiber, mixed media. And I know that one of our earlier discussion points was how did we add? And we were hesitant to add to the collection for a number of reasons. It takes a lot of time. You need a specialist like yourself to be documenting, caring for all of the objects. And so it wasn't until 1996 when we celebrated our 25th anniversary that we really started to think about, we created the Raphael Founders Prize exhibition series, and we thought that maybe with each prize winner, we would be able to add that winning piece to the collection, and it would be an organic way to try and keep together with what had been done previously. But it's very difficult to bridge that kind of a situation. So there was, and that series, I think, are we going on maybe 20 years for that series? I think it started in 96. So
Yeah, I think 96 or 97.
Right. And so we did bring in a lot of beautiful pieces. For example, the Sun Kuya piece, some of the other wonderful Raphael Prize Founders Prize winners, I'm sorry. But the other thing that occasionally happened would be if someone had a piece that was somehow connected to the early years, like Tom Allen, who was an early board member with the organization, donated that beautiful Lenore Tanya piece that we have.
Yes,
That's
yeah.
just like such a standout. And that didn't come until probably the 1990s, late 90s, and he donated that back. But that was a piece that was purchased through the store very, very early on in the 70s. So that would be another way that sometimes some pieces crept in.
Yeah. Yeah, because I knew there had been kind of a conversation about for a while whether we should or shouldn't keep the collection, but I didn't realize it was kind of that early on in our history. I figured it would be a bit later.
Right.
Right.
So
when did you officially become director of exhibitions?
I believe that transition happened after Janet McCall, our second executive director, came on, and that probably would have been in the late 1997 or 98, in that time period. And then I held that position pretty much until for the full course of my time with contemporary craft.
Would you say that you had any like specific approach to planning exhibitions that changed how y'all were doing things before?
I'm sorry, say again, how changed what?
How you guys were doing exhibitions before, did that change at all when you kind of took over and started leading? Or did you have a different approach?
I don't think so. I mean, early on, as I mentioned, Linda Metropolis was the lead there, and she had a very strong eye for the contemporary work, as did Betty. I mean, when Betty Raphael, our founder, was buying work for the store, she was bringing in some of the finest young artists. And that was one of the things I wanted to mention about the collection. Even though it's a capsule collection and in some places a bit uneven, the beauty is some of those early artists are the artists that are really seminal historic figures today. I mean, when you think about it, of course, it's, over 50 years back. But, we have people, I was just looking up some information before our conversation, like Lenore Tanya was an example. there were so many: Peter Shire, Brent Kington, John Cedarquist. I mean, Wendell Castle, which is right out in the front there in the store. I mean,
Yeah, they're huge names. Yeah.
amazing, amazing names. And so that just goes to show not only what Betty was looking at, but again,
Mhm.
Linda and then Janet. I mean, we have always had that really strong focus on high quality work with important content. Oftentimes
Mhm.
we would try and talk to people about the work, and I would say, well, there are quilts that go on your bed, and then there are also quilts that are two-dimensional artworks that bring very powerful messages. And so we always were interested in important messages that artists were bringing forward. One of the very earliest shows that I was there when I early started was the Faith
Mhm.
Ringgold exhibition, and I just saw a
Oh
couple
yeah.
months back. She just recently passed.
Yeah.
Such powerful artists that we had the opportunity to work with. And to just circle back to your question, Janet and I, when we worked together, we always focused on the highest quality work that we were able to
Mhm.
find, artists that were really pushing the edge of the envelope. And so those things were important to us. But early on, we did have a wonderful series of social justice exhibitions that we organized. But even before that, we were focused on bringing diverse voices and, just really trying to show a broad range of craft work.
Yeah. I think what you said also about the collection in which we have objects that are just based in quality and then they did go on to be huge names. That's what I kind of like about our collection is that we do have those names, but also there are people who like didn't go on to have an art
Of
career
course,
necessarily,
of
but
course.
they're like just as important and just as quality pieces, which is super cool.
Absolutely. And even for a
Yeah.
while, way back in the day, some of the pieces from the collection that, to your point, maybe they weren't the top stars, but they actually
Right.
were able to be loaned to schools. And that was also a very powerful and important opportunity. It was like a loan program where pieces would
Yeah.
go out with a packet of information, and then they were handled carefully, and then they would be returned. So I mean, again, the power of that collection is its education value.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know much about the education side of the collection. I've seen like notes on it in the archive about how there was a loaning section. Could you like talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. Um, the person who started that was Alice Lieb, and she had a strong education background. And so we identified pieces that we felt were able to be handled based on their condition and things.
Right.
And as I said, she created these really wonderful education kits
Yeah.
that would almost be like teaching guides for the teachers. So it would position the work in a time period, talk about materials, talk about maybe how it fit into current cultural norms. And then
Mhm.
they would borrow the work for maybe a few weeks. And some of the objects were small, some of them were larger,
Mhm.
like the Jerome D'Angelo quilt that is an
Yeah.
enormous piece, but still was able to travel out to a school and maybe hang in the classroom for a month and then come back. So
Yeah.
it was a really great opportunity. And I mean, it would be cool to revisit that if we had pieces that you felt could go out to schools and
I
stuff.
agree. I would love to like get the collection out there again and maybe even like travel it with how it is
Right.
now.
Even maybe
Um,
by Zoom, you could do it.
Absolutely, yeah. Like little talks or something. I
Uh-huh.
was gonna say also that D'Angelo quilt, we'll have to post a photo on our social media or something, but that thing is kind of indestructible.
And it's
It's like
beautiful.
so well
Right.
made. Yeah.
It has a
Um,
special word for how it's fabricated, and I can't remember the process, but if you,
Oh, it starts with a T.
right,
It's some quilting method where they tie through the
trapunto, I
fold.
think.
Yes,
Trapunto.
yeah, you're right.
Yes.
You're right. Because it makes that like 3D texture on the top. Yeah. How did you see craft change over your time at Contemporary Craft?
Well, to the point, I do see a
Mhm.
really big swing, but I mean, again, it's 40 years, so of course
Right.
things are going to swing. Nothing
Right.
stays the same.
Yeah.
What was very interesting to me is if you even go back a little bit before my time and you look at what was happening in the 50s with craft
Mhm.
artists, they were really starting to break down boundaries. Like Peter Volkus, for example, he would take these huge, large platters and just poke his fingers through them and create these functional forms that were no longer functional. And
Right.
as that progressed, you also saw a lot of artists in a range of media perfecting and seeking the highest quality of their
Mhm.
craft. And the other thing that you saw was as you got into the 80s, um, the proliferation of galleries that were representing these craft artists who were becoming, had very high price points now on their work. I mean,
Right.
it became a very big market for craft.
Mhm.
And, I would say probably in the 90s, early to mid 90s, or you started to see a little bit of a peak there, and then we started to lose some of that gallery representation, and the crafts field started to change a little bit. And maybe coming into the early 2000s with the advent of the DIY movement,
Right.
which incidentally, the name of our organization, originally known as the Society for Art and Craft and People Made
Right.
Things, was a complete full circle when we got to the DIY movement, which is really the same.
That's very true, actually. Yeah.
It's a very fun thing to see. So at
Yeah.
that point, artists were the level of craftsmanship and the focus on that wasn't necessarily the priority. It didn't mean that the work was any less valuable in terms of its content or um, what artists were trying to say, but it wasn't just that very high refined polished craft that you saw a little bit
Right.
earlier. And from that, I think what you've seen is artists that have who maybe originally they might have been known as a ceramic artist. Now artists aren't
Mhm.
even really saying a media. They're saying I'm an
Right.
artist. I'm a mixed media. So all of
Mhm.
that has really swung a little bit differently.
Yeah. Yeah, the way you put it, I never really thought about it that way, but our origins really are based in DIY and like teaching each other and sharing
Right.
knowledge.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is great. I mean, it's a
Yeah,
wonderful thing
absolutely.
because we're able to include so many more people on so many levels than just those
Absolutely.
finest examples.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you see any, do you expect to see any like themes or like moving forward how craft might change?
Um,
I know you can't tell the future,
of
but
course not. I am interested to see how things are evolving, but because I'm retired now, I'm not quite in the
Mhm.
thick of it as much as I might have
Right.
been a year or two ago. But I am always interested to see the work of young makers. And contemporary craft has always had a very important role there. And what you guys also are still doing is so important with the residency program, with providing that
Absolutely.
opportunity for people to find their own path. And
Mhm.
I'm sure artists will keep doing that as they have the need to express themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that we restarted our residency program a few years ago, but we had another version of it in the early 2000s, right?
We did have a really wonderful residency program. One specific artist that was with us, Talia Baharal, came. It was kind of a
Hmm.
month-long series where they would come for a month, stay in Pittsburgh, create work, and then do a small exhibition. And
Okay.
that was a really great program, but it was based more in the exhibitions than it was
Okay.
specifically in the studio. The studio is so much more um, relevant and so much bigger role now in that way than we were
Right.
back then.
Yeah, definitely. More so it's now they come and also like teach or something like
Right,
that.
for sure.
I wanted to ask, because you've worked with so many craft artists in your career, what was an exhibition or artist relationship that either impacted you the most or was the most memorable for you?
So when you shared some of these questions earlier, I
Hmm.
sort of was trying to think, it's to your point, there were so many exhibitions.
Right.
Um, it's hard to kind of,
I seriously was like, I just have to do the math on this really quick.
well, the other thing is time goes just by so quickly, and you say
Right.
35 years and it sounds like, oh my gosh. But then
Yeah.
all of a sudden it's just gone. So,
Yeah.
Um, there were a couple of exhibits that were really special to me. One was in 1995 when we had done a capital campaign at that time, and we expanded the first expansion in the Strip District. And the
Hmm.
inaugural show for that was Lenore Tanya and Peter Volkus, which was a very, very
Right.
beautiful show. It was a two
Yeah.
person. Um, and when I was thinking back about it, I also thought, I mean, I think and I'm not sure if other people are aware, but we always had a very, conservative budget, and oftentimes we would drive places and pick up the art ourselves.
Right.
And specifically on that Lenore Tawney exhibit, Linda Metropolis and I drove to New York in a van, and we pulled up, in Manhattan on a side street. I don't remember, I think it was in the 40s somewhere. And we got in the elevator and we popped out in Lenore Tawney's studio, and it was just the most amazing experience. So that might be a little bit of why I have a memory of that exhibit. But it
Yeah.
was a really, really great show, and we borrowed the Volkus work from the museum and other galleries, and that was really great. Um, Two other shows really quickly. One, I think, was the Nick Cave exhibition. We had
Hmm.
a whole series of beautiful sound suits. I think that was in 2007, which, was pretty early on for Nick Cave. I mean, he was popular, but I don't think he was what he is now. So that was a
Right.
really amazing experience. We created a runway throughout the gallery, and then he had his sound suits there, which were great. And
Very
then
cool.
lastly, I really kind of had a soft spot for the Swoon exhibition. That came on right as COVID was coming in, and we
Yeah.
had to postpone it a little bit, but it was our inaugural show in the new space. While I
Hmm.
always have a soft spot for the old exhibition space on Smallman, I just love installing in that space. And of course, the new space is gorgeous, and the ceilings are wonderful, and it's a great space. But with the wallpaper and everything, the Swoon show
Yeah.
was a really groovy show, and I liked that a lot. So I would say those would
Yeah.
be some of my favorites.
Yeah, we still have some of that wallpaper. I kept it for the archive. I was
Good.
like, this is too good. Yeah.
Yep.
I also wanted to say it's funny that you brought up you and Linda Metropolis driving to New York because I've spoken to her once. I would love to do like a more full interview with her. But everything she told me about the early days was so similar. She was like, well, I was just in the strip district one day and saw that the building was for rent, so I just drove up and
Right.
the lease was signed a week later.
Right. And
Yeah.
that was actually really, a big step for us to move from Verona to a more central location. And
Yeah.
the space there was beautiful. It was designed by Irene Pazinski's team
Mhm.
and Sil Damiano's, and it was in the old fruit and auction. It was called Galeotto's, I think, prior to when we were there. It was
Yeah.
a fruit space. But anyway, the strip was a very special time, and Linda and I had some good times there. And, half of everything when you talk about it is really the amazing people we got to meet, and
Absolutely.
uh, yeah, I would say it was a really wonderful career I've had there. It was great.
Absolutely. I always say that's like one of my favorite things about working in the arts besides art is just like being able to meet everyone.
Right,
You just meet so many interesting people. Yeah.
right.
Um, I just have one more question for you,
Yes.
and that is, what are three songs that describe you and your work?
Okay. Well, I think I told you a little earlier, I'm not a huge music person, but
Mhm.
when I was trying to think of songs, I tried to pick songs that to me signified, as I kind of just said, really enjoying and loving the work that you do. And in these songs, I think that it comes through. So I
Mhm.
picked Sunday Morning by Maroon 5,
Nice.
um, Treat People with Kindness, Harry Styles, and there's a song by Ray LaMontagne called You Are the Best Thing that was also, they all kind of had an upbeat sort of tune. And yeah, I think that kind of encapsulates my time there. Really just kind of fun and love it.
Great. Those are great picks.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me today, Kate. We usually give everybody the opportunity. I know you don't do social media very much,
Right.
if I understand, but if you have any like projects or anything that you're working on that you'd like to promote, feel free.
Okay. Well, I am working, with the folks at NCECA and
Hmm.
the National Council for Education in the Ceramic Arts, and they do a lot of really wonderful work, also based in education. They do an amazing conference every year, so I'm working with them on for the collectors tour for the 2025 conference, which will be in Salt Lake City. So I would be give a plug for that if anyone's interested in going to a
Nice. That's
conference.
very
Yeah.
cool.
And the other group that I'm involved with is the Marks Project. And for anyone who is looking for information about ceramic work and has a mark or a signature on the bottom of a piece of artwork, you can go. It's an online resource, and you can do amazing research through that website. So I would encourage that as well.
Wow, I actually had no idea that you were involved with them, but I also use them very frequently
Yeah,
as well in my research. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for talking to
Well,
me
you
today.
have been so great, and I just want to say thank you for carrying the torch and keeping it
Thank
moving,
you.
and it's great. So, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll stay in touch.
Sounds from the Studio is produced by Rugged Angel Productions for Contemporary Craft. Please subscribe to and rate the show wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to share. Thanks for listening.